what the game is about, in at least a part. Like anytime I say what the game's, it's a very complicated game with a lot of stuff in it. So this is going to be a massive oversimplification of one piece of the idea. But it's about having that taste for looking at the world and trying to understand the world, right? Which is a very noble pursuit. One that I think, while at the same time, there's been a long history of very respectable people who've sort of, put their 2 cents into the bowl about like, I've worked really hard for my life at understanding the world, and here's the best that I have to tell you, right? After all that. At the same time, again, I feel like we're in a society that doesn't value that idea very much, or is very cynical about the idea that you could understand the world, or that you, I mean, in a relatively shallow sense, we have that, right? So we have, like, science and engineering have been very successful.
Yes.
And so,
in terms of describing the world as it is.
Well, in terms of especially understanding small parts of the world, right? So if you want to build a bridge, man, we can really build bridges today, right? We can do a great job at that. A computer is an insanely complicated thing. We can do a great job at that, right? But there seems to be a nihilism in at least American culture and in much of the West if you try to expand the scope of that understanding up to anything bigger than like a particular subcategory, right? And so part of what the game is trying to do is be an exploration of, hey, if we're really just trying to look at the world and understand the world, how do you even do that? How do you take these little things and put them together into a bigger picture? And how do you do that without just being a wacko and just going off and believing a random thing that's totally wrong and dumb, which is something that a lot of people choose to do, right?
And, thematically, the game is about understanding the world, right? To say very broadly.
Yeah.
So then the different puzzle types in the game are sort of meditations on different things that could happen in the physical world. Like, hey, color can combine with other color in a certain way, or glare off of a surface behaves in a certain way depending on its angle. And some of these are more subtle, right? So people will go to that glare area, right? And they'll get the basic idea, but they won't get it well enough. Like, I get complaints from some percentage of players like, oh, that area was just very tedious because it was just like about walking all over the place to find the right spot. And it's like, actually, no. If you look at the angle and you understand what's going on, you can walk directly to the right spot every time. So there is a skill element, but I wanted to cover that phenomenon and not make it so brutally hard. There's trade-offs everywhere. So it was like, okay, you can kind of brute force those in the sense that you walk everywhere until you see it, but there is a player skill dimension, right?
The very interesting thing that happens, right, is, you're always problem solving on at least two levels, right? You have your very straightforward rational mind that's like, okay, A means B and B means C, and I'm if-thenning in my head, right? But, part of your mind is just working very hard in a subconscious nonlinear way on problems. And so what happens very often with this game is people are stuck. They don't have any idea what to do, and they go just take a break. They go do whatever they're doing in life, or they go to sleep and wake up the next morning, and then they just suddenly know the answer to the problem.
Yes.
And that happens a lot to many people who play the game. And, I don't know exactly how to invoke that experience for sure, but from a design standpoint, there's criteria that I stick by to try and encourage the possibility of that, right? And that to me is a really interesting experience. So one of the other things that the game is about, so on the one hand, there's this methodical, I'm developing an understanding in a very complex, I almost want to say manual way, because I'm putting the steps together in my head. But then on the other hand, there's almost this feeling of epiphany that happens where it's just like, bam, right away, you understand something. And it's like an instantaneous transition where a minute ago, you really had no idea, and now you know. And there's a contrast between those two kinds of experience that's interesting.
In a sense, the puzzles are, like Braid, they're not trying to make you be smart. Some of them are harder, some of them are easier. But they're about communicating. They're about exploring, again, some process of form
going through iterations, and you as a player seeing the interesting things that can happen there, right? So that's one of the many levels at which, to sort of get back to the title, right, at which the game sort of has a mode of encouraging a witnessing presence, I would say, to the extent that a game can do that kind of a thing. It's a game about looking at things and seeing them and knowing that you're looking at things and seeing them. So it tries to add, a level of self-referentiality to that process of seeing things, and of asking the question, like, what is it like to be in a world and walk around and be seeing things and be hearing things?